So we were discussing a parable which Ramakrishna used to narrate, showing how determination, great determination helps a sadhaka or an aspirant to realize God. And he gave the example of a farmer who did not take his lunch or even did not rest until late evening. He went on uh, creating, I mean, working in the fields till the water came, and then only he was able to take some rest. Whereas the other farmer, he just relaxed, took his normal, usual lunch, which was brought by his daughter, and then slowly started working. But by evening, he could not bring the water into his fields. So that shows just as a farmer cannot bring water to his field without that kind of determination. So we have to be up and doing. That is the idea. And only with great effort man realizes God. Then we have chapter 4. We begin chapter 4, where a verse from the Bhagavad Gita is quoted by M. The 70th verse of the second chapter, which is also known as the Sankhya Yoga. Sankhya Yoga is nothing but Jnana Yoga. So a man who realizes his own self as the supreme self, or tries to identify his smaller self, Jivatma, with the Paramatma, with the supreme self, he attains to a state which has been described in this verse. Now the verse reads as follows: Apuryamanam achalam pratishtham samudram apah pravishanti yadvat tadvat kamayam pravishanti sarve sa shantim apnoti na kamakami. So a person who has identified his own individual soul with the supreme soul, what happens in his life? He means that supreme self, into whom all the desires enter, as waters enter the full unmoving sea. So he attains peace, not one who is desirer of desires. The meaning of this is that a desireless person, as Bhagavan Buddha often used to say, that one cannot get nirvana unless we get rid of all desires, gross or subtle. Even Holy Mother used to say, even if you have an attachment, she used to quote Thakur, who used to say that if you have an attachment even for a piece of sandesh, you might have to be born again. So, but smaller desires, of course, are insignificant desires and not so harmful as the major desires which cause samskaras, which create the turbulence in the mind. All the turbulence that is created in our minds is because of the samskaras which give rise to these gross desires. So one who has a lot of desires, that is one of unfulfilled desires, which reside in the chitta in the form of samskaras in the causal body. They even before they become subtle thoughts and then gross actions in the sthula sharira, or the sharira which is the gross sharira. Before that, before it even arises in the mind, it is already in seed form. That desire is in seed form, in the form of deep rooted samskaras in the chitta. So they are apparently not manifesting themselves, but when they come in contact with the sense objects, the different sense objects, these thoughts come to the surface of our mind, and then the reactionary mind or manas reacts to those desires, and then it is the objects that we see outside, the gross objects that we perceive outside through our gyanendriyas, that make us do all actions, karmendriya. So in this case, one apuryamanam achalam pratistham, one unmoving sea, samudram apaha, just like the unmoving compared to a river, of course the sea has waves, sea has turbulence, but here the Sri Krishna is comparing the entire ocean as a whole, not a portion of the ocean which is turbulent. It's the whole ocean. If you see, it's a calm ocean. It is unmoving. It appears to be unmoving because it is in stationary, whereas the river is moving very fast. So the desires are like these rivers, and they are moving very fast. But in a man who is uh, who in whom who has realized the self within, so his individual self does not get agitated. His mind may get agitated, but all those their desires, they are absorbed like in the Ishta, or you can say the Parabrahman. Parabrahman we cannot imagine. That is why the concept of Ishvara was created. Who, when you think of the Avyakta, Ishvara has two names. The Avyakta also we call him as Avyakta. That means that which is not manifest, that which is pure Satchidananda or consciousness. But another name given to that Brahman is Ishvara. So that Ishvara helps us the we meditate on that Ishvara in our hearts. The reason being that all our desires, they are supposed to arise from our hearts, not the physical heart, not the gross heart, but the center of our consciousness, the center where our Jivatma resides. So that center is known as the heart, spiritual heart. So the spiritual heart, which is full of desires, when it touches the sea, just as a river flows into the sea, all these petty desires which we have, they are absorbed by this Atman. And the Ishvara absorbs all our desires. That is why Thakur used to say in his very rustic language, Mod Firiyadao. Mane, he says there are desires, there are passions, there are different emotions, but you have to give a turn to those emotions and direct it towards God. Just as the river, if it is flowing on land, it can be very destructive. A river which is full of, I mean, if it is flooded, when there is excess rain somewhere near the source, it is flooded and it submerges everything on its way. But if you block the way, if those desires are not directed towards the ocean, ocean has an infinite capacity. Thousands of rivers are emptying their waters, and the only safest way is to let those waters flow into the ocean. So also in our spiritual life, what this verse means is that desires can be there, desires may be there just like that river, and the stronger the desire, the greater the flow, the more powerful that river is. So it requires an ocean to absorb that. And what is that ocean? That ocean is Brahman or Ishvara, the personal God, our Ishta. So our Ishta, why do we meditate on the Ishta in the heart? Because he can become, just as a shock absorber absorbs all the shocks in a vehicle. So he absorbs all the flow of desires which we cannot control by our limited strength, our limited willpower. We cannot control. So Thakur gave a wonderful solution. You direct all those desires. If you have anger, you direct your anger towards God. Be angry on him that he is not revealing himself. If you have any other negative emotion or positive emotion, change it, change its direction. Just as you used to say in Bengali, mode firiye dao. You just have to change because these you can't stop these rivers. The problem with most of us is our desires are like these rivers. They can be channelized, they can be diverted, they can be directed towards the ocean, but they can't be. You can't put a dam and say, "I'm stopping the flow of these rivers." Many people try that, but it doesn't work. That is why we need a philosophy of life which enables us to direct these rivers of desire into the ocean of Paramatma or ocean of Ishvara. So that is the essence of this verse. And uh, Swami Shivananji or Mahapurush Maharaj used to like this verse very much. He used to often tell that, especially for novitiates, young brahmacharis, used to say that you should be like this. You should remember this verse and try to memorize this again and again. Apuryamanam achalam pratishtham samudramapa pravishanti yadvat tadvat kamayam pravishanti sarve sa shantim apnoti na kama kami. Only such a person, if you are in search of peace, if you want real peace in your life, then the only way is to attain to this kind of state where you direct your desires, just as you direct the rivers and they merge into the ocean, where all that water is absorbed and it does not affect the ocean at all. The ocean never becomes turbulent, no matter how big the river is. But on the river bed, if there is a big river like Amazon or maybe some other river like Ganga, Brahmaputra, when it is flooded, it can destroy many things. It can destroy everything on its way. But if you remove all, that's why they open the gates of the dams which we build, so that the water flow is not restricted. It can be extremely dangerous. So that separation of desires is like building a dam and not allowing them to flow. So we have to allow it to flow. We cannot stop it. We cannot stop the flow of our desires, but it has to be directed and slowly channelized so that the Lord does the rest. He absorbs everything and gives us peace. That is the only way we can have peace. Otherwise, a flowing river will never allow you or allow us to have any kind of peace. If our minds are like these flowing rivers, our desires are like these flowing rivers. So, all these flowing rivers create a turbulence in our mind. Flowing rivers means nothing but desires. So, desires keep on coming, and all we have to do, the easiest way, Sri Ramakrishna points out, is to direct it towards the ocean. And what is the ocean? Ocean is our Ishta if you believe in a personal God, or Brahman if you believe in an impersonal God. So now the next topic after this verse, there is a reason why M has mentioned this verse or given this verse in the beginning of this conversation. You see, the conversation is going on. Vijay is still there, Vijay Krishna Goswami. But M interrupts this. That is the beauty of this gospel. All these headings and the Bhagavad Gita verses have been deleted in the New York version, the translation done by Nikhilananda. That is why we follow this edition, where the literal translation of the original Bengali Kathamrita in 5 volumes. Of course, in the new Bengali 2 volume or 1 volume edition, they have retained all these things. They have because these are very important. M had a particular reason or a particular uh, thing in mind when he quoted these verses. It's not just he randomly took any verse and inserted it in the text. He has carefully thought about it. He has selected the best possible verse which reflects the ideas that are described in the uh, passage that we are going to discuss, and then he gives it a subheading. So the subheading here is slaving for lust and greed. That is lust and greed in uh, Kathamrita, that is the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the New York edition. It is translated as Kamini Kanchan, woman and gold. The same Kamini Kanchan has been translated in a much more uh, better in a better way, according to me, as lust and greed, because woman and gold gives a wrong impression that it is biased as far as gender is concerned. Why can't we say men and gold? For the other gender, it is men and gold or greed. But lust and greed, Kamini Kanchan literally, essentially it means lust and greed. So slaving for lust and greed is the heading he has given. So now Sri Ramakrishna is talking to Vijay after giving that wonderful example of how determined a person, a sadhaka, should be and how restless he should be to realize God, and with what determination he should work, just as that farmer does not stop till the water reaches, he irrigates his whole farm, his whole field before he retires. Then he can go and take his meal and then relax. So that is what Sri Ramakrishna tells Vijay, but after that, he just asks Vijay a personal question. You used to come here often. Why not recently? You see, this is the sign of an ideal guru. An ideal guru is one who keeps track of the disciples' progress. So, this is a very important fact. In fact, when I read a beautiful book of Sister Gargi, who wrote a book, A Heart Poured Out, she was writing the reminiscence. She has published two books on her guru. One is her own experiences, her own biographical details, how she came in touch with her guru and how her life was transformed. So, Diary of a Disciple, that is the first book she wrote. But before she passed away, she wrote a book which uh, explained to the world the glory of how a guru trained his disciple. And what the title she gave was very apt, A Heart Poured Out. So it was Swami Ashokananda who, uh, just like Sri Ramakrishna here, is so much concerned. That personal touch is so very important that you can communicate with your guru. So Vijay comes there. Of course, Vijay Krishna Goswami was not a formal disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, but Sri Ramakrishna being uh, the world guru or Jagat Guru, Guru Maharaj as we call him, he was concerned about both initiated as well as non-initiated devotees. Whoever came to him, whichever faith he belonged to, perhaps Vijay Krishna Goswami uh, had taken initiation elsewhere, but anyway, he used to come as if he comes to a guru. So Sri Ramakrishna used to keep a track, and he was concerned that genuine disciples, uh, he was concerned about their welfare. There were many disciples, but about some disciples, he was very particular. And like Naren, if Naren did not come for some reason, or even Master Mahashay, very often he was so busy with his school. So he used to often ask him, why don't you come these days? I have not seen you. Of course, unless he was very busy, Master always never missed a chance to communicate with Sri Ramakrishna. That's why we have the gospel. But Vijay gives a reason which most of the disciples perhaps would give. Sir, I want to come very much, but I am not free. I have accepted work in the Brahmo Samaj. Now, this is a common excuse. All of us are in so many professions. Yesterday, we had a class on the first class. In fact, it was the second talk or on the divine play, Holy Sri Ma Sharda Devi and the divine play. So there also somebody asked a question at the end of the talk that Holy Mother's life was lived in a rural setting where she apparently had had the rural setting, just cooking and other things she did. But what about the modern women who have to do professional work in addition to all other domestic activities? She has to be professionally active. So, how can we consider Holy Mother as an ideal for modern women? Because if you remember, Holy Mother, Sister Nivedita, who was modern by all compared to Holy Mother, she came from the West, totally professionally educated in the West, and she herself was surprised to see how modern Holy Mother was. She said towards the end of her, after the passing away of Srima Sharda Devi, or no, she when she was alive, she wrote something very significant. She says, I don't know whether she is the last of the old tradition of old order of women who will never again appear. Means what she wanted to say is, like this questioner who asked this question, that whether she was, whether it is possible to have Holy Mother as an ideal. She lived in a rural surrounding. That was the argument, and that is what most people feel. Ki the circumstances and the situation in which Holy Mother was perhaps does not suit or fit the modern woman who has to compete with men for a professional job and have almost the same thing, same type of work they do as men do in the professional field. So whether Holy Mother can be an ideal for modern women. But Sister Nivedita was a bit confused. She said, is she the last of the old order of women or first of the new order? So is she setting a trend to show modern women what spiritual life is? So that question, and then of course she found the answer. Obviously, Holy Mother, though we think that she lived only in rural surroundings, but it is far from true. She, in fact, she was more busy than any woman CEO would be, because she was professionally, I mean, in the sense she lived in a city, a town with so many varieties of people coming to Udbodhan, especially the last part of her life, the last phase of her life. And she guided not only the Ramakrishna mission but innumerable devotees, householder devotees, sannyasin, brahmacharis, unmarried women, and Sister Nivedita school. So there were a large number of people from a variety, different varieties of professions who used to come. Doctors used to come, uh, uh, teachers used to come, magistrates used to come, film actors used to come. The famous film actor who, that Parsi film actor, uh, who took initiation from Holy Mother. He came all the way from Mumbai. He belonged to the Parsi religion, and he got initiation from Holy Mother. So she was not a reclusive type of woman who stayed in a uh, remote rural setting, just doing nothing but making roti and cooking for food and cleaning the dishes and all those things, cleaning the leaf plates. That was not the only thing. That was one phase of her life. But the second phase of her life, where she traveled extensively, she went to so many pilgrimage places. Even Thakur did not visit so many places. So she went, she observed, she made remarks, she gave major decisions, which even people like Brahmananda, Swami Vivekananda, Shardanand used to sometimes be confused. The political situation was so bad that Ramakrishna Mission had to face a lot of difficulties. And when that happened, even when the World War was going on, there was an economic crisis in India. So you see, for everything, when they were in deep trouble, these monks, the so-called educated monks and many other householder devotees would ask her questions. And if you see the answers, it is like she was like a stately person, stateliness and calmness. That is how Sister Nivedita describes. A woman, imagine a woman CEO is running a very big organization, a multinational corporation, and how much of stateliness, royal, a kind of administrative skill that woman needs. There are great women CEOs, but Holy Mother matched all of them, or in fact exceeded. She was never disturbed. Even when the General Secretary Swami Shardanand had to face so much trouble politically and otherwise, some administrative problems, some decisions they had to take. Every time Mother was consulted and she gave the exact answer. So it is not that she did not uh, stay in I mean she stayed only in a rural setting and she could not be an ideal for modern women. Far from that. So also Sri Krishna, if we see, he tries to, he is futuristic in his approach. Just as Holy Mother of course outlived Sri Krishna. She lived for 34 years more. But here you will find that Sri Krishna is also anticipating the changes that would take place. In those days, I mean, whether it was America or the Western civilization, was not so materialistic. It was not materialistic. This lust and greed was not perhaps so much. Uh, we could not observe that in the whole world. Though there were wars and quarrels for money, and lust and greed was a predominant trend, even before Sri Ramakrishna was born. History shows that. But the material civilization which was to come, the competition which gave rise to greed, the kanchan, the desire for wealth and capitalism and all, they were unheard of. Everybody, all the countries, though they were rich countries, poor countries being exploited by the rich countries, this materialism was not so much prominent. But Sri Ramakrishna appreciated that, and he knew what will be the two major things that will change the destiny of people or destiny of societies in the future. So that is why he now and then, people sometimes in America also, when the first translation was done, many Western devotees perhaps thought it was Thakur was exaggerating. Why does he say again and again lust and greed, kamini kanchan, kamini kanchan? What is the significance? How does it, why it should be given so much importance? Because at that time perhaps people had not realized to what extent these two things can change the history of a nation or history of a society. You see the great kings who lost their kingdoms because of this lust, or even Ravana, if you see right from time immemorial, you will find these. And greed. Greed, of course, is a universal trend which is there everywhere. It has just changed its form. Earlier, the kings used to be greedy, but now nations are greedy, and as a collective force, these nations, earlier this idea of nation kingdom was ruled by the king, and it was the king's greed that decided the future of a country. But now it is not just the king's greed, because the prime minister or his cabinet is run, it is the collective greed of the people who elect these people, and they take decisions based on national interest. So that greed has come in a different form. It may not be one monarch or one king who is greedy and he uh, destroys his own kingdom and others also in the process. So these effects of the modern civilization, Sri Ramakrishna anticipated. That's why very cleverly he tells Vijay, because Brahmo Samaj, accepting work in Brahmo Samaj, in they were following the modern trend. This idea of a professional approach to preach religion, these were not there in Hinduism. Nobody taught religion for a fee. Whereas accepting work for a salary or maybe for some pay or some benefits was very common, because that was taken from other religions, organized religions. And he says, I am not free, because the moment you take up a job, if you do something out of your own will, then you are free. But if you accept work, then you have to follow the rules of that organization. So he is complaining, or he is trying to justify why he cannot come to Thakur, though he wants to come. But he says he wants to come very much, but I have accepted work in the Brahmo Samaj. So Sri Ramakrishna, like a child, obviously, if somebody else was there, such a great preacher would have been offended if if any other person had pointed out the defect which Vijay Krishna Goswami, but he directly, though he does not tell him that you are a victim of this, he says, lust and greed bind a man. One loses one's freedom. So you see, he's telling that you say now you are not free because you have accepted work. What is the reason? You have curtailed your own freedom. So when there is a woman, you need gold, and for that you have to be a slave to another person. A man loses his freedom and cannot act as he wishes. So much so that he gave the example of the priests of Govindji temple in Jaipur. Now I don't know where he heard this story, but this was true. The priests of the Govindji temple, I happened to visit this temple. Obviously, Sri Ramakrishna never went to Jaipur, though Holy Mother visited much later. But that tradition was there. The downfall of this Govindji temple, I asked the local people, and they say there is this story. So it is not that Sri Ramakrishna just created this story. He had heard from somebody who had perhaps come from Rajasthan or Jaipur. So he says the priests of the Govindji temple in Jaipur did not didn't used to marry. They were not married. There was a rule, the idea of secular priests in Christianity. There are secular priests and there are monastics. So there are certain rituals in the church, like funeral, like birth, marriage, and all those things. They are done by secular priests in most of the religious traditions, whether it is Hinduism or some other religion. So the secular priests do these secular activities. So, and since this priestcraft slowly was introduced in otherwise there was no priestcraft. Each one followed his or her own religion. You don't did not need a priest to interfere on your behalf, and everything was done by the family, inside the family itself. It was a worship room was also not, public temples were not there. They came much later after Buddhism, but before that the Vedic rituals and religion was practiced as a in the home itself. So these priests, they never married, when because this Govinji temple is a very ancient temple. So in the beginning they had enough unmarried people, and that was one of the conditions, that if you marry you cannot become a priest, because the reason is very clear now why Swamiji, why Sri Ramakrishna is telling this. They had great spiritual and mental powers then, naturally, because they were leading a life of celibacy. Definitely, they were independent, and the moment you are independent, you are not a slave to any person. So that's why Thakur is now justifying that man loses his freedom and cannot act as he wishes. But earlier, before the priests were allowed to marry, they had tremendous power. The king, who obviously all the temples were under the king, so the king once sent for them, but they refused to go to him. They said, if you have anything to ask or anything to do, you come, because they didn't need his money, they didn't need his favors. Instead, they sent a message, let the king come here. So that kind of power, spiritual power they had, and that was the reason why even the king had to listen. We know the famous story in Akbar's court when the guru of Tansen, who, who was a great singer himself, and Akbar wanted to listen to his songs. So he said, if you sing so well, he told Tansen, then what about your guru? I would like to listen to him. So please bring him to the court. So Tansen, of course, for the sake of wealth and other things, and for his sake of his family, he had to take employment, and he was, of course, given a lot of honor. But when his guru, who was a sadhaka, who took music as a sadhana, when he was asked, Tansen went and requested his guru, the Emperor of India, Akbar, wants to listen. He is a great lover of music. Why don't you come? So he simply refused. He said, I am not going to come. If he wants, let him come. Now, Akbar was so keen to hear him. He said, if you sing so well, how well your guru must be singing. So he came in a disguise with Tansen. Of course, his guru understood that, but at the same time, Akbar had to disguise himself like an ordinary citizen and listen to his music, because he never sang in public. In a court, especially in a court, he would never sing. So he used to sing all his devotional songs and in the temple itself. So Akbar had to go there. If he had to listen, he had to go there. So similarly, these pujaris or these priests of Govindji temple, because they were unmarried, they were not married, they said, let the king come here if he has something. After consulting his counselors, now there will be clever householder counselors in the court, who would give the king some advice. The king now decided, okay, now they are the counselors were very tricky. Just as Mathur Babu, somebody told Mathur Babu that Sri Ramakrishna, the madness that he has is because he does not have a married life. He does not enjoy a married life. So they tried to lure him into some house of ill fame. Similarly, here also, somebody told the king, why don't you marry them? So king arranged for their marriage, and somehow they agreed to marry. Now the king no longer needed to send for them. They would come to him of their own accord, saying, Sir, I have come to shower my blessings. Here are some sacred flowers. This is what typical priests, pujaris, secular priests, they do. They have created all these rituals and sacred flowers and that's prasad and all these traditions. They reduced worship to a material level because of their own greed. That's what Sri Ramakrishna is trying to tell, that these same priests who refused to go, now they are going to the king uninvited and asking him, giving him some flowers, telling him that this will bring you good luck, please accept them. They had to go to the king for everything. They had to build a house because now they are married, celebrating the rice taking ceremony of their sons. That was expensive. The janoi and all the thread ceremony, putting their children through school. So now there are so many responsibilities. They could no longer live without money. So that is why Sri Ramakrishna gives this example to Vijay Krishna Goswami. And then he says 1200 Nedas. Nedas means they are like shaven headed Vaishnava monks. Neda and Nedi, shaven headed nuns. So it was a tradition which we borrowed from Buddhism, that whether one is a man or a woman, if he embraces monastic life, he has to shave his head. So in Bengali, they are known as Neda, shaven-headed Vaishnava, especially the Vaishnava monks, and 1200 Nedas and 1300 Nedis. You know this story. So this Bengali story is there. It's there in the Bengali tradition, especially in the Vaishnava tradition, that Nityananda Goswami's son, Veerbhadra. Nityananda Goswami was a famous Vaishnava. So his disciple Veerbhadra, his son, who was also his disciples, had 1300 Nedas. He managed to convert, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was very particular that one has to embrace monasticism. That is the traditional Vaishnava. Though he was married, he lived and died like a monk. So these Vaishnavas, there were 1300. It's a huge number. Monks in those days, even after Buddhism, you will find this tendency for large number of people to become monastics. Of course, it disturbs, according to Swamiji, the structure of society, because if everybody becomes a monk, then it is very difficult. But here the tradition was there. Even during Buddhism, the monasteries were full of viharas. Viharas is from the word vihara, bihar has come. So these viharas were full of monastics, kings and rich people who have renounced the world and come. Even Jainism, which was flourishing along with Buddhism, converted a lot of people. So there were a lot of monastics. So naturally, this Vaishnava tradition, because of Chaitanya's influence, 1300 disciples Veerbhadra had. When they became spiritually perfect, Veerbhadra was alarmed. Why? He thought they have all become spiritually perfect, so anything they say will come true. That is why Sri Ramakrishna was afraid of some of his relatives like Haldari and others who did a lot of spiritual practices, but unless they controlled the desire to use their spiritual power for the uh, for harming somebody. For example, he once said, "You will vomit blood," and actually it happened. So if somebody misuses his spiritual power, that is difficult. So when 1300 monks, they go out and suppose they are ill treated and some of them lose their control and curse somebody, then it becomes a very big, it will create a chaos in society. So Veerbhadra was alarmed that since they have become spiritually perfect and they whatever they say will come true, uh, so unwittingly people will come to grief. We thought that there is a reason, because sometimes, like Durvasa was all full of anger, though he was spiritually perfect. So everybody was afraid of his curse. Whomsoever he cursed, that curse came true, and then he could not take it back. So it's very important to to do spiritual practices, but be in control of all these powers. One has to overcome the desire to use these powers. That is what Patanjali says. These are the great pitfalls. So Thakur never liked all these things. Similarly, Veerbhadra was alarmed because he thought so much of spiritual power, if it is not guided properly for the good of humanity, some of them might offend, some of them might curse people who offend them unconsciously or unwittingly. Thinking this, you remember the whole of Yadava dynasty was cursed by the rishi because some of the Yadavas, mischievous Yadavas, tried to play a trick on the rishis who were meditating, and they cursed, and then the whole Yadava kingdom was destroyed. Sri Krishna, of course, saw it. He knew these people are having so much of evil tendencies and they will destroy themselves. So he thought that Veerbhadra said, called all his disciples and said that you come to go to the Ganges and perform Sandhya and Puja and worship as they normally did. So these Nadas, Sri Ramakrishna says, had attained such spiritual perfection that they would go into samadhi when they meditated. They did not have to perform austerities to do it. They would not be even aware. The moment they sat for meditation, they would go into samadhi. They had developed such great spiritual powers. They would remain absorbed in meditation even when the ebb tide had receded. So they would not even understand what is going on, whether the tide rises or the tide uh, is receded. They would just be sitting in meditation, the bank of the river or bank of the Ganges, which is close to the river, close to the sea. So the tides affect the flow of the river. Now 100 of the 1300 Nedas anticipated what Veerbhadra would ask them to do, thinking that they should not disobey their preceptor. They got a hint why our Guru is asking for us. He was alarmed. He wanted to curtail their powers. So some 100 out of uh, 1300, 100 did not go. They said if we go and if Guru orders us to do something, we have to do it. And if we do it, we will lose our powers. So they disappeared and never saw Veerbhadra again. They got what they had to get. They realized God, then they did not want. The remaining 1200 went to Veerbhadra, who said to them, these 1200 ladies will serve you. Please marry them. So, so these 1200 people, slowly so Sri Ramakrishna says, if you, once he married these 1200 people, then they said as you please because they could not disobey the Guru. So each of the 1200 Nadas had one Nadi to serve him, and after this, regardless of the strength of their austerities, their spiritual powers lessened. Living with women, they lost their powers because in their company they lost their independence. So the idea here is that when you are when you lose your independence for some reason, whether it is because of attachment to gold or attachment to lust or whatever be the reason, once you lose your independence, that is why Swamiji said dependence is misery, independence is freedom. So he is indirectly telling Vijay Krishna Goswami, and he continues, he says, you yourself have seen what happens when you accept employment under others. Many scholars who have studied English and passed many examinations are trampled every morning and evening under the feet of the English masters. So the reason for this is lust. Having married and enjoyed the happy household fare, they now can't escape. That's why they put up with so much suffering. All the insults and the kicks they received from slavery and humiliation of their British master, just for the sake of employment, they had to bear all this humiliation. So after telling that, of course, no doubt he was a bit harsh on Vijay Krishna Goswami, because he knew that Vijay Krishna Goswami, though he had accepted employment, basically, since he was belonged to the Goswami family, he had this wonderful spiritual nature. So he wanted to uh, prevent him from getting attached to these employment which he had taken up with the Brahmo Samaj. Because of his ability to speak, they had employed him as a preacher. Following the Christian missionary tradition, these Brahmos were very aggressive in those days. So they needed people who could speak well, and they used to recruit. And if you recruit householders, naturally they should be given some salary, otherwise how will they look after their home? That is how the tradition of secular priests came in Christianity, who can own houses, who can marry, and who can also do the religious rituals in the church. So Vaishnavas also, in a way, or the Brahmo Samaj in a way, followed this tradition, and they used to have this secular priests. So the next heading, now the dialogue is continuing, but M gives a separate heading now. He says, after subheading, after God realization, women are worshipped as mother. But he says, it's not that you should not mix with women, but the attitude with which you mix with women is more important. The converse is also true, mixing with men in the case of, because he was addressing a man, he was telling about women. That is the confusion, because most of these dialogues or most of this conversation are held with men where women were not present. So that's why he uses the word women. But when he spoke to women, whenever he spoke, he used to address them as give examples, giving men as the example. Anyway, so once you develop deep dispassion and realize God, you will no longer have attachment to women. Even if you live in a household, you won't feel that attraction. There is no danger then. Say there is a big magnet. Now, Sri Ramakrishna was so full of examples. He could give examples from day to day life. I don't know where he saw all these things. No doubt he was taken to the Indian Association for Cultivation of Sciences, where he was shown the magnets, the different. He was even offered to, um, I mean, have a peep through the telescope to see how it enlarges things. So that was a new discovery in those days. Those who did not go to schools, they perhaps never knew what a microscope was. So perhaps he would have seen a big magnet and a small magnet. And that's why he is giving this example. He says, say there is a big magnet and a small one, which will attract the iron with greater force. Surely the big one will exert a stronger pull. God is like that big magnet. Compared to him, woman is a small magnet. What can she do? So on the other side, he's comforting Vijay Krishna Goswami, and through him, many people saying that if you have love for God, if God is the big magnet in your life, then other small magnets will not attract you. That's a more, it's, you can't get rid of the smaller magnets. They will always be there. The smaller magnets can be anything, any desire, not just uh, lust, or there may be greed, there may be greed for property, greed for money, and so many things. So, but these are small magnets. If you align yourself, if one aligns oneself to the bigger magnet inside our heart, then spirituality prevents us from getting attracted. You may live in the company of different smaller magnets, but they will not attract you if you are connected to the big magnet. So then immediately a devotee, perhaps he knew the practical difficulty. Most of us will not be able to do this, especially householders. So this devotee asked, should we, sir, then should we hate women? Because when he repeats this again and again, the question will naturally will arise in the mind of the devotee, then what shall we do? Then Sri Ramakrishna says, those who have realized God do not look upon women with lustful eyes. So they have nothing to fear. They actually see that women are but manifestations of the mother of the universe. So they worship them all as the mother. So then, saying this, he tells the devotee that I am not asked you to give up the company of women, but if you consider that she is a reflection of the divine mother, then there is no harm. The mother of the universe, Prakriti, who has assumed in fact, the whole of Prakriti is a great attraction. The whole gross universe, it's not just the women or the gold or any other thing. The whole of Prakriti, the three gunas, they are the feminine aspect of the Purusha, the other counterpart of the Shakti aspect of creation. And true spirituality lies in disassociating. Yoga tells us yoga is actually defined as viyoga, the disconnecting, the disconnection of the Purusha and the Prakriti. Now, how do we do it? We align ourselves with Brahman, we align ourselves with Purusha, the higher consciousness. We align ourselves with this big magnet. The moment we do it, the smaller magnet loses its charm, loses its attraction. Now, Sri Ramakrishna at the end is telling Vijay, he knows that without satsanga, without constantly hearing of these wonderful things, these are very, perhaps for many people, it may be unpleasant things. But at least if one hears constantly, somebody used to ask Bhuteshanji that if we cannot follow many of the teachings of um, Sri Ramakrishna, his ideal is very high. So he said, for that reason, should you lower the ideal? If the ideal is high, we may not be able to practice it, but at least reminding ourselves will lessen the intensity of our attachment to the things around us. That is what these things do. And punaravrutti, he used to use that word. Why Thakur keeps on repeating? He has told us once, we have understood. Why should he again and again tell us? It is, for some people, it can be very depressive. That how can I give up all these things? So Thakur used to tell, I have told you what I had to tell you. You take whatever you can. That fish, when you eat a fish, you remove the tail and the head of the fish and you eat the flesh if you want, if you can't digest, if you can't eat the entire fish. So he used to tell, I will give you the fish, now you take whatever you want. So he is not discouraging anybody, he is just telling different things to different people. But because he loved Vijay Krishna Goswami very much, he was a bit frank. You will see, to some people, he would not use these words. Only to some spiritual people who used to come, though they may be married, but they were highly spiritual, especially Master Masha and others. If you see their life, even Girish Ghosh, for that matter, the transformation that took place in him, the detachment he had towards the end of his life. Of course, there are householders like Nag Mashe who were right from beginning detached, but there were others who were attached. And Thakur could read their minds. And it is not only the monastic disciples that he talked about renunciation, because he knew that if I tell 10, 15 times to Vijay Krishna, who is again and again coming, if he were to be a worldly person, we know for certain that he would not have come for the second time. If people don't like to hear certain things which they don't want to do, then they don't come again. Many people did not come back to Sri Ramakrishna. Some people would come with their relatives, ask them, you go there, we don't like to hear all these things. We will sit in the boat and wait for you. If you finish, then you come. Because these are all impossible ideals. We cannot follow them, and what's the fun? But Sri Ramakrishna did not dilute his ideal. He just spoke what he wanted to, and it is left for us. He gave us the choice, as Sri Krishna gave the choice to Arjuna. You take whatever you want. I have given you tons and loads of wisdom through these 18 chapters. Think carefully, take your own decision, take whatever you can according to your capacity and follow it. But I will tell you what is the highest. So that is why Sri Ramakrishna here in all these chapters you will find in the next chapter also Vijay Krishna Goswami is still there. Since he says you come here again and again, still he complains and he says I have to do the work of Brahmo Samaj, so I can't come here often. I'll visit whenever possible. Then Sri Ramakrishna tells something very important. Look here, the task of a religious teacher is very difficult. You can't teach people without having a direct command from the God. So now he is trying to remove his attachment. Perhaps Sri Ramakrishna felt that he was a sincere sadhaka, spiritual aspirant. But his job was not just for money. This is very clear from this dialogue, this conversation, that he was not just doing it for money. He he was doing it because he was recognized as a great religious teacher. That is what Brahmo Samaj offer. Many times it is not just the money that attracts us, the preachers. It's the idea of power one gets, or the idea of superiority one gets. So Sri Ramakrishna understood that though I told him so clearly, he is still attached to his job. Maybe it is because of, not maybe, Sri Ramakrishna knew it's difficult, because so he removes that obstacle also and says that, remember, to become a religious teacher, you may just speak about religion, but to become a religious teacher is very difficult. Unless you get a command from God, you may preach, but it will not have its impact. So Sri Ramakrishna is telling all these things from his own experience. He had this experience and he spoke, and that is why his words are powerful, and so powerful even today. Whereas nobody reads the talks and the erudite speeches of Vijay Krishna Goswami. No doubt they were recorded and published. He was a very good speaker and a preacher. But hardly people read all these things. They were great preachers. Even Keshav Chandra Sen and so many other people were there, Brahmo preachers. Preaching was a passion with them. So Sri Ramakrishna is just trying to give him a hint that whether you have taken the job or for money or for some name and fame, in either case, it is going to harm your spiritual life. So that is what he tells. And then he says, he doesn't say you don't preach, but he says if you preach without receiving a direct command, then people won't listen, because such a teaching does not carry any force. So first of all, one must attain God by practicing religious disciplines, and then by some means or the other, by following any path. And only then, after getting his command, then he gives a parable which we will discuss in the next class. He used to give an example that unless there is a board, people will take bath in a clean pond and dirty it. Again and again they will do it, but if a notice is put by a competent authority, then people will stop using the drinking water for other purposes other than drinking. So that example we'll take up in the next class. So let us see if uh, there are some questions. We can take up a few questions. Yeah. From tomorrow we will be having, not tomorrow, we have already had 5 classes. The Great Master, that is on every Thursday at 7. If you like, you can attend, because the gospel sometimes can be understood better if we understand the wonderful way Swami Shardanand has explained the life of Sri Ramakrishna along with his messages. So many of the examples he has taken from the gospel, many incidents, and then tallied it with the life of Sri Ramakrishna. So the Divine Play, or Sri Ramakrishna the Great Master, is a must-read book. It at least once in a lifetime we have to read it thoroughly, especially those who have Sri Ramakrishna as their Ishta, because that is how we can identify or meditate in a better way on our Ishta. So this great master, and also the gospel, of course we are discussing regular gospel on Sunday and monthly ones for Scotland group of devotees. But now we are posting all the old gospel talks. First we posted all the 21 talks on YouTube. Then we managed to retrieve, though the quality is not good, from Facebook Live. Some videos were there, so with great difficulty we downloaded them. And though the quality is not good, the audio is good. We managed to create all the 2020 videos. 2019 there were only a few, because this live broadcast, or maybe the recordings were done only after in 2020. So there are few 2019 which will also be uploaded. So everything that was being discussed either on Saturday, Sunday, and then now Friday, Thursday, Friday, and Tuesdays will be put on YouTube, so that most of the people who attend from India now are not able to attend because 7 o'clock is too late. Some of our other weekly classes are also at 7, and they perhaps see it in the morning or after, whenever they get time. So if there are some questions, I think you can just ask.
Yeah, thank you, Maharaj. Has anyone got any questions for Maharaj as per the today's session?
Maharaji, I don't have a question, but I can't help but just reflect further on what you just mentioned about Ma a bit a while back. I mean,
Yes,
I think she's probably the epitome of a modern woman,
exactly,
and
exactly. First,
how the way she
first of
is,
the
like,
new order of women. Yeah,
absolutely. I
that
mean,
is how the Western women read her. Unfortunately, Indian women are. I mean, that these are not my words. Vireshwaranji once said, "Why Holy Mother is more popular?" If I don't know whether you have read it, in the West after 1953, when her biography, big biography, was first published. It took a lot of time to publish. It is the Western women who spoke up, and you see all the Hollywood nuns. Most of these nuns were blown away by the wonderful life and message of Holy Mother more than Ramakrishna and uh, Swamiji. Normally, so people come to Vedanta through Swamiji and they like Vedanta, but Holy Mother is hidden for most of the Indians. But he said she became more popular in the West first. And now, when Indian women are becoming more and more westernized, they are also appreciating it. So, there is some modernity on in Holy Mother's life which we have to interpret or understand. That is what we are trying to do in the divine play on Tuesday, because this is a very important aspect of Sri Ramakrishna's incarnation. Otherwise, there is no reason why Mother will live for 34 years. You compared to Holy Mother, as Sri Ramakrishna himself said, I have done nothing, you have to do everything. So this time he gave all the responsibility to Mother to establish the ideal for which he had come. He did, of course, he was the uh, he started everything, but then he felt that his body was old enough to now pass on the baton to Holy Mother, and she took it from there. But it takes a lot of reading and understanding, especially because her life was not available. Swami Shardananji could not write. With great difficulty, he finished the Great Master. And she was alive, Holy Mother was alive, so naturally he would not write her biography when she was alive. But a lot of material was there, reminiscences, and it has been very good effort by Swami Chetananji to publish her divine play. So this is a great opportunity to understand her life and message in the context of uh, the modern woman who is looking for some kind of empowerment. She's always looking for empowerment. There's so much of competition now, and it's good. Swamiji wanted that. Secular in the secular field, they are almost equal to men now, but not so in the spiritual field. Till now, I think that spiritual liberation, which Holy Mother showed with her through her own life, that has to be understood and practiced, which is a bit difficult in the sense religious orders are not flexible. They are not flexible. They don't want to give in economic and social and political fields. Even political, they don't allow women to. They were dominated even today, directly or indirectly. They're dominated by men only, especially in some countries. But at least they have got some kind of chance in the other secular field. But in the spiritual field, the organizations, the church, and many everybody is so rigid that the it will be dominated by men for a long time till Thakur's power, slowly the mother's power, not Thakur's power, Holy Mother's ideas start spreading, and then that real empowerment of women will come. That was Swamiji's dream. That was Thakur's mission in life, and Swamiji tried to fulfill it. Yes.
Runji, I just have a comment. Can I?